Bonus round. You didn't think we'd come all the way to car day just to compare the M2 and M4, did you? The video you saw last week, the BMW Sports Coupe Showdown, we couldn't leave out this beauty here, right? And we have to be honest, right? When we talk about BMW M, no one else has the same historical significance, right? The same mystique as the name M3, especially if we're talking about an M3 competition in this beautiful Portimao blue. That's the name of this color, right? By the way, what a beautiful track. I recorded the series O Sonho do Mundial with Kaká Bueno back in 2014. I love the Portimao track. Since we're talking about Portuguese tracks, check out our videos driving the M3 E30 DTM champion in 1989 at Estoril, another Portuguese track. Portuguese, but this is the only, unfortunately, I would say, option for those who want a brand new M3 in Brazil today, the M3 competition. Why do I say unfortunately? Because following the reasoning from the previous video where I chose the M2 as my favorite, also because it costs over 200,000 less, but as a family man. Leaning toward the M4 for its usable back seat, even though it's less exciting and less instinctive to drive than the M3, the M3 solves this problem even more, right? The M3 is the super sports car for the family man. This right seat is pushed back. Let's come here from the left side because then you really have a car you can use as a daily driver, right? In Brazil, it's a bit more difficult, right? But then you really have a usable back seat, headroom, space for Nano's car seat here. If you negotiate with Roberta and she moves this seat a little further forward, the M3 really has a more family-friendly temperament in that context, right? That's why the competition package, right, which stiffens the suspension here, even includes the competition seats, right? Yeah, it goes a little bit against the purpose of the M3, which I think, yes, is really cool. There's an M3 competition, but if you're talking about something focused on ultimate performance, maybe your M is one of those two over there, right? And here, yes, I think there's room for BMW. Hi, Tiago. I wonder which Tiago set that up. We're hearing Tiago's audio. Tiago, take care, Tiago. I would like, as a family man with sports aspirations, who knows, to have the option of having a slightly more civil, slightly calmer M3, so to speak. And I don't really mind, or rather, I wouldn't really notice that 30 horsepower difference, right? Because the competition treatment there, we're talking about 510 here. We're talking about 400 actually. Here we're talking about 510, right? There we're talking about 480. We're talking about 510 horsepower, 66 kilogram meters of torque 0 to 100 in 4 seconds. The traditional 8-speed ZF transmission is in all three here. I'll tell you guys too, it's a spectacular transmission, yes, but I still feel like it's just a little bit lacking in responsiveness, right? In sporty driving compared to a dual clutch, right? Because the ZF is the best torque converter transmission for sporty applications in the world. It is, but it's not a dual clutch, right? It's not a PDK when it comes to response agility. But man, I would gladly take an M3. Not the competition with 480 horsepower like they have abroad. In fact, abroad, both the M4 and the M3 have the X-Drive option, right? The all-wheel drive, which we don't have here in Brazil. Yeah, for a rainy day in São Paulo to go up the Serra de Campos on a rainy day, all-wheel drive would be welcome too, right? Yeah, then you'd have a car that's a bit more usable. And not just because of that, mainly because of the price, right? It turns out that the M3 competition and the M4 competition end up overlapping a lot, right? We're talking about a 905,000 Rs car here and an 895,000 Rs car, right? Plainly put, they're both 900 grand cars, right? I'll say even more, talking to the folks at BMW, having lunch here at Car Day, you know what I'd really like to see in Brazil? I'd like to see the M240i, right, from this G87 platform here, which we didn't get in Brazil. We only have the top of the G87 platform, right? Abroad they even have a 220 version of this car. Yeah, but there's also the M240, there's the 228 too. Yeah, it's a very niche thing in Brazil, right? It's a sports coupe that's not the peak of performance, right? It's something more for the enthusiast, a bit more rational, but who knows, right? This car comes from Mexico. Who knows, maybe an M240 could come here for 499 grand versus an M2 that's getting close to 700 grand. And the same reasoning applies to the M3, right? Yeah, even here in Brazil, we have the 330e hybrid, right? We don't have the 330i that's available abroad. I think we're missing the 3 Series. Yeah, more aimed at the enthusiast who wants the usability of a sedan with a bigger trunk without having to spend 900 grand. In something really focused on extreme performance, which in practice, when it comes to big sedans, right? The track use of the M3 and M4 in Brazil is going to be very limited. I think the M2, especially now with the M2 Cup, makes perfect sense. But anyway, here I am giving free advice to BMW without being asked. I'm sure there are a lot of smart people at BMW who do market research and deal with these issues that many times the public, the Brazilian automotive internet just doesn't get, right? For example, wow, these two cars here only have a 30 horsepower difference. Okay, this one's bigger, but why is this car 200,000 more expensive? It's 900, the other is 700. What's causing the price difference? BMW, greedy, but blah, blah, blah. No, it comes from Mexico, doesn't pay tax. The other one comes from Germany, pays tax, right? So this kind of thing is always being taken into consideration in the feasibility studies that the brands do to decide whether to bring a product and, if they decide to bring it, what the configuration will be. Speaking of configuration, these gold wheels are beautiful. I really like them. I've seen the M4 in this Isle of Man green here with the gold wheels. It looks really stunning. But let's do this. You've already seen us pushing hard in the mountains with the M2 and M4 going uphill. Let's talk a little more about the viability of the M3 competition as a daily family car, and if it works in this scenario, going down the mountain back to São Paulo. Let's go. But after all, how's it going, Congressman? Look, we're here showing you a bit of behind the scenes of the spectacular car day, right? The museum here in Jordans do Campão. A must visit, guys. I was gonna say, if you like cars, you have to come. But actually, you don't even need to like cars, right? Because car day is a real history lesson. But I'm purposely doing this more urban tour here because you saw us tearing it up, right? Pushing hard in the M2 and especially in the M4, right? Which is basically the same car as the M3, just with 2 doors. Exactly the same. Not quite, not quite. You know why? Check this out, it's interesting. I just looked at the specs now. Yeah, the M4 is longer than the M3, man. When you look at the M3, right? Sedan, you assume it's going to be more practical, more family-oriented. And it is, right? Because the difference in usability of the back seat is huge, right? Not just because of the amount of space there. It got stuck here. We've been in first gear this whole time. Yeah, my late grandma Narita, the first time she took the driving test, already older, right? She took the test when she already had grandchildren, around 50-something years old. She did everything right, arrived. Mrs. Narita failed. She was like, how come? I did everything right. No, ma'am, you did everything right, but you never got out of first gear, right? If you're a driving school instructor, leave a comment because you probably have some good stories like this too. Yeah, but I just wanted to show a little bit of what it's like to live with this car, with this type of car, right? Man, yeah, even though I hate that word, right? But in the current Brazilian reality, at 900,000 reais, the M3 is exotic, right? What's it like to drive an exotic car here on the narrow streets of Campos do Jordão, still full of potholes, even though the property tax revenue here is probably a fortune? Yeah, you saw us driving a lot in sport mode, in track mode, right? M2 and M3. Now let's just go in road mode, right? Yeah. Here, look, road mode. All driver assistance systems are available. This big spoked wheel with this super low profile tire really takes its toll. Yeah, in a real world situation, look, it feels like you can actually live with it, right? I think the seats in these competition models are very aggressive, right? They're not too tiring for daily use. I mentioned in another video that I prefer the regular M2 seat to the M3 and M4 competition seats. But look, we just went over a speed bump, the way Brazilian speed bumps are, right? With no engineering at all, each one done their own way, depending on the whim of the person who decided to make it. Look, this one's huge. Will it scrape? Oh, it didn't scrape. So yeah, it becomes a sensible option. But as I was saying, right, The M4 is longer, it's 4.8 meters. The M3 is 4.78 meters. So it's easier to parallel park the M3 than the M4. Same weight too, right? We're talking about 1,730 kg. When you look at a sports coupe weighing 1,700 kg, in the case of the M2 and the M4, it seems a bit excessive. When you look at it, look, it's a family sedan, 4 doors, at 4 meters and 70, 4.78 meters that carries 5 people, 1,700 kg, it doesn't seem so irrational after all. I think our GPS had a little delay. No, that's not it. Hey man, pay attention. The entrance to a private property. Of course, right? When you have this kind of obstacle that twists the chassis like this, that's when your head really shakes, right? Because you're talking about a very stiff suspension. Mice. But I dare say it's almost a rational choice for the enthusiast who has a family, who has a small child, needs a car seat, needs some trunk space. Even though the full-size spare tire also takes up a lot of space in the trunk, the M3 becomes an almost rational option. A quick pull. Just so you can feel the roar, right? I told you, right? The 8-speed ZF, of course, we're in road mode, right? We're not in sport or track mode, but it has a little delay that a PDK wouldn't have in a kickdown like this. Yeah, but I won't leave you guys empty-handed either. Yeah. Let's speed up a bit more here, going down the mountain. It's always hard to accelerate going downhill, right? Going uphill on the mountain is when we can be a little more daring. But just so you can also see a bit of the dynamic behavior of the M3 competition, we'll be right back. Look how ZF handles the downshifts here, see? We're going to start descending the Serra de Campos. You have to be careful, there are cyclists. Releasing the clutch here. By the way, you have to be careful because there are cyclists. Why is it hard to accelerate going downhill on a mountain road, but it's so cool to accelerate uphill? Lomba is a word from the south, right? It means hill. Physics, right guys? First you gain speed really fast going downhill, right? And then you can't really show, let's use Parentina here, you can't really show what it is. It's the gain in speed and power of the car in the real world because it's being helped a lot by the downhill. But mainly, going uphill you can, exactly because the car is working harder and gaining less speed, you can keep it under more load, right? It's with the right foot. Oops. I'm missing out here, look. I just minimized my phone. I'm missing Australia and Egypt, right in the middle of the World Cup, just so I can drive the M3 and make a video for you guys. We make sacrifices for automotive journalism, but especially when it comes to braking, right? You can feel much safer going uphill if you want to drive a bit more enthusiastically, because if anything comes up, right? With slower traffic ahead, you hit the brakes and the incline helps you. Your braking distances are shorter than on flat ground, obviously, right? No. On a downhill slope, your braking times are longer, so it becomes much, much more dangerous. It's Friday. The response from the paddle shifters, I mentioned it in the other video too, right? These carbon paddle shifters here. From this M2, M3, M4 trail, I'll put them on my wall at home. Friday in Serra de Campos means a lot of traffic, right? So I don't think I managed to do much more than short little fun clips so you can enjoy the sound of the S58 3.0. It's a classic, right? If you watch a lot of car videos, you probably heard someone say inline V6, right? No, it's an inline 6. The 3.0 inline 6 is the most iconic engine configuration from BMW, right? I'd go even further. Naturally aspirated is even more so, but they're gone now. Those engines belong to a different era. But it still is, right? This longitudinal engine with rear-wheel drive, I'd say that's the quintessential BMW layout, right? Nothing is more BMW than that. I keep eyeing an M2 from the previous generation, maybe to have as my next project car in the garage. But look, we're in hold mode, right? I'm going to take it out of manual. I'll put it back in D here, look. The noise level stays way down, it's very civilized. Of course, the steering responses are really quick, right? That can be a bit scary for people who aren't used to a sportier drive anymore. In fact, look, I'm going to let it roll here at 80 kilometers per hour. Look, 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 whoa. The car, boom, changes direction like a motorcycle, right? It's impressive. It's a car that requires both hands on the wheel at all times. This is the car for someone who's really here to drive, not to mess with the phone. If the guy bends down here to mess with his phone, the car swerves to the other side. Soon enough, you'll be going down the valley towards Santo Antonio do Pinhal. It really is a driver's car. But aside from that, which I love, right? It's not a criticism, it's totally a compliment. Aside from the very quick steering ratio, I'd say my ears just pop now. We're going down the mountain fast here. Do you want to lend the M3 to your mom? It's more or less like lending a 320, right? In road mode, if she doesn't mind the extra stiffness, especially on rough roads, you can lend it to your mom to go to the bakery on Sunday to buy bread for everyone's breakfast. Yes, I would consider having an M3 like his in São Paulo. Yes. And you? Tell us in the comments. Leave a like on this video. Subscribe to the channel, it always helps us a lot. As always, thank you so much. Show some support and check out last week's M2 versus M4 video. Thank you so much. Bye. Bye.